Boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Hulegaard Books podcast. As always, I am your humble host, David Hulegaard, and this week I am joined by romance author Liz Borino. As a sci-fi author, you may be wondering how much I know about the romance genre. Well, the answer to that question is very little, which is why I've invited Liz onto the show. However, forget about those novels that your mother reads, because Liz takes you between the sheets in ways Danielle Steele never dreamed of. Liz is a novelist specializing in gay romance. Her resume of complicated love stories between two men is both heartwarming and blood-pumping. Over the last several years, Liz has amassed an impressive following of fans, tantalizing readers with her unique combination of gripping, plot-rich storytelling and steamy scenes featuring muscle-bound men. The conversation gets hot and heavy as Liz talks about the differences between writing gay and straight romance, her thoughts on the perils of self-published authors bypassing a professional editor, and her marketing advice for independent authors trying to break through. All this and more in episode 6 of the Hulegaard Books podcast. Liz Borino, welcome to the Hulegaard Books podcast. How are you this weekend?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you on the show because I say you are probably my oldest friend in the whole book publishing industry. I think we're coming up on, 3-4 years now since the Independent Author Network?
Yeah.
Something like that. I know it's been so long I'd lost track. All I know is that you were involved in proofreading my second novel, so I definitely have known you for a while. So thank you for that, if in case I didn't thank you back then. Well, you are a busy person, and I swear, even though you and I haven't talked in a while, I've been following your progress, which has been very, very impressive to see you just keeping busy and just cranking out books in between all of the other personal commitments you have, like being very intelligent and going to school and all that good stuff. So I wanted to check in with you, really just kind of talk about 2013, because I was so excited to see you had published No Flag at the or toward the end of 2013 to a lot of critical acclaim, and it was so fantastic to see that. So I really wanted to, first of all, kind of give you a chance to talk about No Flag. It's a very, very fascinating story, very poignant for the time, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and really kind of get your thoughts on what the reaction has been since it came out.
No Flag is I hesitate to say military romance. Mike is an officer. He's a captain, and he falls in love with Will. And Will says, okay, I want to be with you. I want to build a life together, but I can't do this army spouse thing. Mm-hmm. I just can't. Mike said, you know what? I'm ready to be done. My commission ends in 2 months. Will said, great, let's get married. So they got married. And then their business opened on February 14th, actually, of 2013. On February 2nd, Mike's commanding officer called him in and said, we'd like to re-up your commission. And Mike said, no, thank you, I'm done. He said, we'll increase your benefits, we'll even extend your benefits to your spouse. And Mike said, no, thank you. In his head, he said, I don't want a divorce. Mm-hmm. I don't want a divorce, so no. But he couldn't say that out loud. His commanding officer said, I really suggest you take this deal. He said, no. He said, okay, fine. Then I'm utilizing stop loss, and you're going for a year.
Wow.
Yes. Now, stop loss is a military policy that allows the military to involuntarily extend a soldier's commission or contract, depending on the level, for a time of 1 year. We could say that Will was not happy about this. But that would be a minor understatement.
Well, exploring something like this seems like it would have required such a huge amount of research. So, I mean, what kind of research did you do to prepare for a story like that?
I knew nothing about the military. I had heard from a friend that she had a cousin who was a mechanic in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept re-upping him after he said, okay, I'm done. No more. I said, that isn't right. Is that possible? She said, apparently it is.
Wow.
What happened was when Mike was over there, he got hurt and he lost his arm.
Oh, jeez.
And so then I had to do research into amputation and spouse's reaction to amputation.
So did you reach out to people and conduct some interviews, or did you find a lot of content online?
I found most of it online. I talked to soldiers and some soldiers' spouses,
Mm-hmm.
so I got their perspectives. But the internet is fantastic for things like personal blogs
Mm-hmm.
from people who have been overseas and the people at home who have to deal with this.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because what I found is there's a lot of sympathy for the soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
especially soldiers who get hurt. There's a lot of sympathy, a lot of support, but not so much for the spouses.
Huh.
When you think about it, the caregiver suffers not as much. I don't want to trivialize it, but they suffer equally, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, it seems like some pretty deep territory to be mining for a story. Like, did it have any impact on you emotionally? Like, was this a really difficult story for you to tell because of this, these things you're finding out from real people that have experienced this?
It was. It really opened my eyes a lot to how we treat our military
Mm-hmm.
and how we treat their spouses, because there's such a huge gap. We have people over there. We have people going and risking their lives for years at a time, and then they come home to find what kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
There's hardly any mental health support. The support is just lacking. If you look at statistics of even job placement and resulting homelessness for veterans, it's astronomical.
Mm-hmm.
It's just terrible.
Well, one of the things that I've always admired about your writing is that you have a way of telling these really deep, sometimes gut-wrenchingly difficult scenarios, but still, under the banner of a true romance story. And I know that you challenge yourself in ways that just blows my mind, where I'm like, how is she going to make that a romance story when it just sounds so difficult and sad? But you always find a way to lighten it by the end of the book. So I've always appreciated that about your writing, and so
Thank you.
Without any spoilers, do you feel like No Flag is a story that once you can get through, some of the rougher elements, that there's still kind of that ray of hope that that your characters are going to end up okay?
If I can't make these characters fight for each other and end up maybe not happily ever after,
Mm-hmm.
but fighting together, then I won't write the story.
Mm-hmm.
We need that. We as a global community need to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yep.
The other thing about No Flag, people had mixed reactions to this. There's a level of BDSM in it.
Mm-hmm.
They're a domestic discipline couple. What that means is Mike makes the rules, Will follows them, or gets punished.
Ah. Well, you bring up a really interesting point, because I would. Is it fair to say that you would be classified as a romance writer?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's probably a fair distinction. But what I find fascinating is that out of all of your books, you tend to gravitate heavily towards gay relationships. And I've always wondered, I mean, you and I have talked about this off of podcasts before, but I would love to kind of open up this conversation again and talk about what are some of the challenges of trying to tell authentic gay romance stories versus traditional romance stories.
Honestly, I find traditional romance stories to be much, much more difficult to tell.
Oh, really?
Yes. because in my experience, readers go into an MF book or story with certain expectations.
Mm-hmm.
They expect the couple to conform to gender roles and conform in very specific ways. I was never okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't comfortable writing women that way. In one of my first books, I wrote a character and I disliked her so much that I had to kill her.
I am familiar with said character.
If you write differently than what readers expect, they're less likely to buy it or review it well.
Yeah.
I find that there's more freedom
Mm-hmm.
in writing gay romance because there isn't a prescription. Yes, some people will say they expect one the alpha and one to be the beta. They're preferences, but there isn't a prescription. And for me, I just find it more flexible.
So when you're writing romance, is it tougher to get into the head of gay characters, or did you find that you had a lot of support from either friends or people that you'd met in real life?
I'd like to tell you that I started off with a whole lot of support for gay characters, but I didn't. When I started writing gay characters, they came more naturally. They were easier for me to write, and readers responded better to them. I wish I could tell you why, but I don't know.
This is going to sound really bizarre, but in a weird way, I can relate to what you're saying, because even though, I don't write romance in my stories, I mean, they don't fit in as well in kind of the sci-fi paranormal world, but when I'm writing stories, there are times when I have to write like a really deranged character that does horrible things, sometimes very, very graphic, horrible things. And for whatever reason, it's so easy to do that, to slip into that character, even though if you know me, you'd be like, wow, he's like one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? So in a similar way, are you kind of saying like you had a similar experience writing gay characters where it just fell into place naturally, where you felt comfortable in the minds of these characters and it just allowed the story to flow from a very authentic place?
Yes, that's exactly what I would say it is. To me, it's not so much the gay or straight line. It's knowing your characters.
Yep, so true.
I think we put too much emphasis on, oh, she writes gay romance, he writes straight romance. Why is a straight man writing gay romance? Obviously not me, but this is the conversations we hear online.
Right.
People question why a woman would write male characters. I find the conversation rather silly in general, because if we all wrote about exactly what we were, exactly how we acted, what we did in life, it would be rather boring.
Yep.
We can't, because we'd have no variety in our stories. Like I said, it would not be very interesting.
The thing that's always been fascinating about your books is that you have a very detailed way of taking the reader between the sheets. and it's funny because, like I was saying earlier about the difference between knowing people in real life versus, their voice in books. To talk to you in real life, you would never know that these that these very graphic scenes exist in your head. But I find it fascinating that you're able to, and that you want to challenge yourself with these types of things where, obviously as a woman, it'd be difficult to imagine a male sex scene. I would assume maybe it's not that hard, but but I would imagine there are probably some biological differences that would make that more challenging. So how do you go about coming up with these scenes and conjuring these scenes? Because based on reader reviews, your audience loves it. Like, they think you have this incredible knack for writing very detailed sex scenes. So I'm just wondering, where does that come from?
Honestly, it's not all that different physically. If I was writing a male-female sex scene and a male-male sex scene. Slight accommodations have to be made, but all in all, the positions don't have to be all that different.
Mm-hmm.
The main differences that I've seen are if you're doing anal sex, you always have to have lube.
Makes sense.
Yes. I imagine. It's what I've read. It's really important to see what happens when you ask questions. This is why my mother has stopped asking me questions.
No, I think it's good. You know, it really. I've always been fascinated with the amount of research and really just getting to the hardcore facts. Like the approach that you take to get there is, it's something that not every writer would do. And I myself have added elements of romance to some stories. I wrote a series of short stories where it was possible to add a romance element. And I honestly thought a lot about what I'd read in your books as far as setting the stage for a sex scene and taking the reader, into the bedroom with these characters. And it wasn't something I was sure I could do, because even if you're a kind of person that just loves sex more than life itself, it's a completely different situation when you find yourself behind a keyboard writing about it, because there's nothing all that erotic about sitting in front of your keyboard. Uh, well, depending on who you are, I guess. But
there's a kink for everything.
Indeed there is. But I mean, I'm not the kind of person that's going to sit there and just think of like, yeah, that'd be really hot if I added this and that. That just doesn't happen. So it's always interesting to see how people are able to write such tantalizing scenes, just not being in the moment. You know what I mean? Like you gotta take yourself there in a headspace. And Too Long Didn't Read. My point being, it's not easy, and it's fascinating to me when writers such as yourself are able to do that and generate these like really erotic moments. So kudos.
Thank you.
We've talked about No Flag. You've also been working on a collaborative series, right, with Michelle Stevens?
Mm-hmm.
So what's going on with that? Is that going to be an ongoing thing, or are you done?
Well, we have one more, and it's coming out in July.
Mm-hmm.
It follows two couples, actually a couple, Zach and Steve, and a triad, Alex, Drew, and Shane.
Mm-hmm.
She writes the triad, I write the couple. We were talking about being in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the hand-eye coordination to imagine that many limbs. So I leave the triad to her.
And also shed some perspective on what Michelle's working on at the moment. And Zach and Steve are from one of your previous books, right? Aren't they from, is that Action?
They're from the Mind series.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And that included casting, action, cutaway, and that's a wrap.
Okay.
I took them, and they acquired Steve's younger sister. He had never known that he had a little sister because he had a interesting mother.
Mm-hmm.
His mother went to jail. They read about it in the paper, and they got a call from CPS. Hey, we've got this 13-year-old kid. She's your sister. Can you take her?
Surprise!
And they're like, yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's the right thing to do. But they were in the midst of moving to New York, so they needed a nanny. And her character, Drew, became the nanny. From there, met Alex, and Shane tied in a later book. Drew met Alex in book 1. Shane tied in book 2. They were an official couple by triad by book 3. Now we're working on 4, which will be released in July.
Awesome. And then is that kind of the end of the series at that point, or do you think you might have some ideas for a later collaboration?
That'll be the end of the series.
Okay. And then Michelle starts working on a quad?
That might be possible, but I think Michelle is done with publishing.
Well, at least she got to go out on a high note, right?
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm always curious about, I love asking other authors this, is when you complete a series or even just a novel, but when you look back, what lessons do you take from a series and apply towards your next series or your next novel? Like taking the Mind series in particular, what did you learn from that experience that you feel like is going to really strengthen your next effort besides the triad?
Well, my greatest lesson from the Mind series is that short books seem to sell better, with the exception of No Flag. Anything after the first in the series is more difficult to get reviewed and get bought, I'd say. Which is interesting because for me, in my experience, the first book is never as good as the second.
Yeah, a lot of world building happening in that first book to kind of set the stage for the rest of the story.
Exactly. That's the way it's been.
Mm-hmm.
I've also found that even if you're working with an established couple, readers like to know where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I learned from the Mind series. When Action was published, it got a lot of reviews.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of these reviews were saying, we liked the story, it was great, but you started us 3 years in. How'd they meet? And so I went back and wrote a prequel for that.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, that did not do as well, even though people asked for it. But it is what it is.
Sure.
I like working with established couples better. So now, when I write them, I tend to do flashbacks. And that's what I did with the Angel series. But with No Flag, how I did it was I started it when they met and only gave snippets of in the beginning of their relationship.
Mm-hmm. I think it lends itself well to the topic of, kind of lessons that you learn and take to the next book, because like you said, and I've heard this from other authors as well, that you can write a really popular like first book in a series or in a serial, and you can get tremendous response and some great reviews, and you see that dwindle as the series continues. And I think it's fascinating because you think of like your favorite TV show or your series of movies, and usually you're kind of chomping at the bit to get to the next one. And I wonder, from a consumer perspective, is it just because there are so many options for entertainment these days that you can easily forget like a series that you had started? So when the next one comes around, I mean, I'm just about ready to wrap up my trilogy that I started 4 years ago. And the first book, same thing like you're saying, like I got a lot of reviews and really positive feedback. And the second book, it was just a fraction, like a fraction of that. And so I'm a little scared of what's going to happen with the third book. But I wonder, where did those people go, between first and second book? So it's interesting for me to hear your perspective on, things that you've experienced, things you've learned, and then when you came out with, or you start applying those lessons to the next series, and you say, romance readers wanted an origin story, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give them an origin story for this next couple. So that's really cool.
Thanks.
One of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about was the rate at which you're able to publish completed works, because you are able to conjure up these very deep storylines and yet still able to flesh out entire stories, and not one, you're able to flesh out multiple stories and put them out within a calendar year. And I've always been intrigued by that, because I remember you and I had a conversation, God, it's got to be like 2 years ago now, and we were talking about Patty Roberts, I think it was, and how she was able to write 10,000 words in a sitting. In a sitting! Like, 10,000 words for me is like almost a week. And that's a good week. So clearly you've been able to somehow juggle, your personal life in addition to writing a lot of good words. So how do you how do you do that?
You keep talking about this personal life. I don't know what you're referring to there, because I write, I edit, I just finished school. I'm job searching, which, takes time, but I'm going to be honest and tell you that I'm giving my writing and editing work 110%. I know math people are going to hate me for that. I'm not a math person. I'm sorry, guys.
As authors, I don't think we should be held accountable for a mathematic equation anyway, but that's just me.
We shouldn't. I'm giving so much effort to it so that the job searching becomes less important.
Yeah.
Because I would like to make it my career, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm putting a lot of effort into not only getting it done quickly, but getting it done as well as I can.
I wanted to ask you about that because, we were talking about crazy deadlines, and you mentioned that you had written, was it Angel's Hero? You wrote that in like 3 weeks?
Yes.
How in the hell did you do that?
It was actually, let's just say this was the worst set of 3 weeks to be doing this in. And if you don't know what the worst set of 3 weeks to be doing such a thing in, it had to be done on December 1st. My final papers were all due by December 10th. Okay?
Yikes. Okay.
So, my publisher said, we've got this spot in February that we'd love for you to fill. And I said, okay, I can get something done by February. She said, no, we need 2 months between. Excuse me, what? She said, I really think we want to capitalize on the popularity of No Flag. So if you can get another military book out. And I said, okay, I'll try. I'll do my best.
So deadlines, aside, and you're able to crank out stories so quickly, and quality writing, I might add. I'm going to have to take some cues from you, because I swear I've been working on my novel for almost 2 years now. By the time it comes out, it will have been 2 years since I published my last novel. So I'm definitely not not working with the the same skill set you have. I'm definitely going to have to ask you to bottle that up and sell it to me.
One thing I will say is that I have a great team behind me. Mm-hmm. I have fantastic beta readers and editors. Mm-hmm. What I did with Angel is it was originally supposed to be one book, but there was just no way. There was no way that I was going to get 50,000 words in 3 weeks. I wasn't capable of giving good work under those circumstances. Trying to pass my classes at the same time.
Minor things.
Yeah. I don't think my mom would have enjoyed getting the call. Yeah, I'm trying to finish this book, so I'm gonna fail out of my master's degree a semester before I'm done. I know. It just wouldn't have gone well. So what I did, as I was writing, I would send it to my beta readers. And once I finished it, I sent it to the editor, to my freelance editor, while the publisher's editor also had it.
The funny thing is, there's an author, Drew Carpesian, who writes kind of high fantasy, and he gets contracted a lot to write like Star Wars books and things like that. So he very, very prolific, talented writer. And he had actually written a blog about this very topic, and saying that he gets emails from readers all the time that tell him so and so book was so good, but you left out a word on this page, or you used the wrong version of this homonym on this page. and they said like they always include offers, right? Where it's like, oh, Drew, I'll proofread your book for free. And, he was making the point that when you write so many words in a book, like even if there's, like the tiniest fraction percentage of an error or opportunity for an error, it's like it's going to happen. And that there are no published works anywhere that are without error. And it's interesting because that makes me feel better, because I'm like you, right? Like if anybody ever says, oh, this book was so good, except that he left out a word in this chapter. It like, oh God, I just want to like punch myself in the face and be like, why are you an author? But to know that even somebody as prolific as Drew Karpyshyn is also experiencing the same thing, and he's got a team of editors, right? Like, I mean, this guy has support. But yeah, it's frustrating, and these are the things we deal with. But overall, I honestly believe like the quality of publishing is getting a little better for us little guys that don't have big time support. At least I want to believe that.
And I agree with you that it is getting better, or it has the opportunity to be getting better.
That's a better way of saying it. Yep.
Because there are still some authors who completely disregard the need for it.
Yes.
I see people posting, I don't need an editor, I can edit my own work. And I just want to shake them because no, you can't. Even the best of us. You can probably say that it's possible to copy edit your own work.
Yep.
Go through and find the correct commas and apostrophes if you know the rules. And if you know when you should be breaking them. There are certain things you just can't catch enough of it to be able to say, okay, I'm 100% good on this, and we're just going to put it out into the world. People like us, small press, indie publishers, authors, we're still at a disadvantage.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe it's not that we should be or shouldn't be in terms of perception and things like that, but should isn't the point anymore.
Yep.
It's just what is. We have these perceptions on us. We have to make a decision. How are we going to combat them? Are we going to work against them or just keep up the cycle?
No, you're right. It frightens me to think that my work might get overlooked because, a consumer will say, oh, I've had really bad luck buying self-published work from, independent authors because the quality just isn't there. And then it makes them less willing to try another book. And that's not me saying that, I think my work is better. That's just me saying that I try to follow a procedure. Like you said earlier, I have a team of beta readers that are very helpful in not only line editing, but also just helping me make sure that the story makes sense, that there's no major plot holes. I have great perspective because as a male, it can be difficult to write female characters in a way that feels authentic. And I've got beta readers that help me make sure that that's in line. So I have all this really good stuff. And then at the end of that process, I move to a professional editor. And I spend probably more money in editing than I make in a year on royalties, but I do it because my hope is that when people hopefully discover my work someday, that at least it's all going to be done and quality work. And that wasn't true when I started. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like my first two books could definitely have benefited from better editing, but it is what it is. And I've since learned. So I think you make really good points about that.
I'm going to say take pride in it. And that's how I think we can do that.
Indeed. That's a really good transition into another topic that I wanted to have with you, because one of the main reasons I was so anxious to have you on the show is because I think out of a lot of the kind of either self-published or, small press authors, that I know or that I've come in contact with, you really seem to have a handle on the grassroots marketing approach. And I would love to get really like your tips, your tactics, like anything that you feel like sharing with other authors who are are struggling, because it can be really tough to you work so hard to get something out there, and it's like, now what? It doesn't just magically attract readership. But I see you, like all over the place. You're writing like guest blogs, you're getting feature reviews on websites, you're showing up on people's podcasts. um, I'd really like, how do you approach self-marketing? Because you definitely seem to have a good rhythm going.
Part of it for me is that I majored in public relations as an undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
I have a basis of how to approach the media. That's where I think I started off. I can't say I've been completely 100% successful. I would say the biggest thing is to find a balance between not being afraid to approach people, to approach blogs or media outlets that you think are quote unquote above you,
Mm-hmm.
and not being a pest. There's a part of me that says, you know what, I get it. I get that we're all desperate for people to find our work.
Right.
And many authors say, that's nice, that we should pay an editor. But I need to make this money before I can pay that editor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also understandable.
Yep.
It's a vicious cycle.
No, it definitely is. And I think that editors are not a one-size-fits-all proposition. And, you really have to do some homework on your editors before you hire one, because I've had the luxury of working with both good and bad editors. And I say luxury because I think it's important to understand the characteristics of what makes a good and bad editor, so that when I'm working with an editor in the future, I want somebody who at the end of the day gets what I'm doing and understands my work and understands my voice. Because if you have somebody who's just kind of editing by the numbers and they don't give a shit about your story or your style, they're just like, you know what, pay me, I'll edit your book. That's a really cold experience, and they don't get what you're trying to accomplish, and they send you a bunch of edits that are grammatically correct, but they don't necessarily fit what you're trying to accomplish in that particular scene. And I can give you a really good example, because I think that when you're a narrator, like say you're telling the story through third person, right? Your narrator should absolutely be held accountable for the strictest of rules, right? But when you're looking at dialogue, you want to give characters personality and you want to give them authenticity. And to have an editor not get that and start telling me like, I don't understand what you're doing, this is not the correct use of this or that, and I'm like, because that character is not a Harvard graduate, right? Like this character is not going to graduate, magna cum laude or something, right? This is not going to be that type of character. And it really matters to me if somebody can read what I'm writing and say, that was funny. Anyway, my little soapbox moment. But
as an author and an editor, I can tell you that there are things that, like you were saying, things that as an editor I really get and I'm really enthusiastic about, and I'm making good suggestions, and things that I'm editing by the number. There have been times where I've messaged authors when I was doing freelance work and said, I'm not the right editor for this project. I'm sorry. That cost me money, but it was a matter of integrity. Because if you're an author, you know how important that perspective is.
Absolutely.
I have one editor who is absolutely fantastic. She'll do minor research things for me. Like, I made a reference to SpongeBob. And I spelled Bob with a lowercase b because it was part of a larger word.
Right.
And I thought Word was just being obnoxious with the little red line. And when she looked at it, she said, nope, I looked this up. There's supposed to be a capital B here. I said, oh, okay. And that's very different from someone saying, this is in passive voice, take it out.
Right,
Make
exactly.
it active. It's like, no, that's supposed to be in passive voice. Read the sentence.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it just is. And I think like that's been one of my hangups with working with editors is that I absolutely want an editor that knows the rules of grammar, preferably someone who knows them better than I do. I mean, I'm a writer. I'm going to make mistakes, especially when I'm writing, like 100,000 plus words per book. So it's good to have somebody that knows those rules and can like call you out for it, make a better story. But what I'm seeing, in kind of trying out different editors and trying to find the right fit for me, is that there are a lot of people out there that become editors because they are, quote unquote grammar Nazis, and they're really good at like stomping out very particular types of grammatical error, and that's fantastic. Except that they can't relate it to me in a way that is constructive, because there's nothing that pisses me off more than somebody taking a high and mighty approach and being like very snarky with their feedback about how I missed something or I did something incorrectly. Because I'm sure as a writer, well, both a writer and an editor, when you're writing, you are moving so fast, right? And a billion things go wrong when you're conjuring this stuff up and you're typing it as fast as your little fingers can go. You're gonna miss words. You're gonna pick the wrong version of the homonym. Like you're gonna do all kinds of things that are gonna happen, and you're very sensitive about that because you don't want people attributing that to you being stupid or not knowing things. But a good editor will just say, hey, maybe if you tried flipping your sentence around like this, or maybe if you try to make this more active, whatever, right? Like just giving you constructive things that will actually help you as a writer, not make them feel better because they know more about grammar than you. And
yes, I agree.
That's where I'm running into issues as I'm searching for a new editor. But anyway, not about me.
One thing editors talk about, last thing with editors.
We'll get back to marketing, I swear.
I promise you. They talk about the passive voice and how passive voice is evil and it should be active all the time. But here's the thing. It can't be active all the time. Passive voice has its place, and it has its place when the character doesn't know what's happening, or they're trying to skirt around an issue. For example, there was a knock at the door. That was a sentence in my manuscript. An editor highlighted it and said, passive voice reword. I said, no. To reword that would be, someone knocked at the door. Well, we don't know who's knocking at the door. And if you're being jolted out of thought by a knock at the door, passive voice is okay there. That's just a random example.
I think that's a very valid point, because there seems to be trends in what editors are looking for, or what they what they'll call out in your manuscript, and passive voice has definitely been one of the biggies over the past, I would say, probably couple of years. And not that it hasn't always been something monitored. I only mean to say it's been kind of pushed to the golden standard now, because it used to be adverbs or ly words, right? Like that was like the big deal, and every editor just cracked down. And then once we kind of eliminated the adverb issue, or drilled it into the heads of writers, then we move on to something else, which is good, right? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have very tightly written, whoops, there we go with the adverbs. We're going to have very well written manuscripts, which benefits all of us. But to any event, this is a podcast topic later on down the road I'll get into about tips for writers. But something else while we are still tiptoeing in the realm of marketing, which I originally brought up.
I'm so sorry.
No, that was all me. I'm like, you say something and then I'm like, let me tell you something about editors. No. But on the subject of marketing, I'm curious for you, like in your experience, like what are some of the best and worst ways that you've been able to market? Like things that you've done that worked out well and things that you've done that you probably won't do again, besides this podcast.
Oh, I would do this podcast again.
Okay, perfect.
For me, I'm not good at live interviews. Mm-hmm. I'm just not. As you can tell, my brain doesn't always catch up with my mouth. Mm-hmm. I do either recorded interviews like this that can be edited or written words, which are always better because I can edit them myself. And say, oh God, that's not what I meant to say at all.
And no one knows if, like, you lose your train of thought because it all just sounds cohesive.
Right. Eventually, it hopefully sounds cohesive. I would say that the best thing you can do is keep putting out books. Mm-hmm. Because the more books you have out, the more opportunity people have to latch on to you. When readers discover a book that they really, really like, they'll go back and buy your backlist. Mm-hmm. I will say that people say do series, and we've talked about why that hasn't worked for me or you. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure for some people it works really well. That's not a universal.
Yeah.
But still, any amount of exposure that you can get is going to be helpful in terms of having more books out. Mm-hmm. And the other reason having more books out is helpful because the more books you write, the better you write.
Very true.
Practice makes progress. I'm never perfect. We can never go around saying practice makes perfect.
No. I find that out when I count the typos in the emails I send you.
If you want to hear about a typo, a mistake in an email, rather, my BDSM novel with Michelle, the couple and the triad, mm-hmm. I had to send that to my publisher, and I had to send one of my final papers to probably my strictest professor, and I mixed up the emails.
Whoops.
That was fun.
And oddly enough, I got an A.
I did actually somehow, because I caught it and I said, please, please, please ignore that last email. Don't open it. Don't look at the first page. It doesn't exist. This exists, and I think it's all grammatically correct. But in terms of marketing, what else would I do? I like doing guest posts. Mm-hmm. I know there's a whole legion of people who say you have to blog, you have to blog, you have to blog. And I try. Yeah. Honest to God, I try. But there comes a point where you have to do social media, you have to write, you have to blog, you have to keep an updated website. And at some point, I just want to say, can I sleep ever?
Yeah. Like I want to write my book. I don't want to spend, all my waking hours marketing. I know what you mean.
Right. And it's like, I made a comment about the Angel series because I'm setting up this blog tour. And I'm like, I just queried 40 people. And if all 40 people say yes, I'm going to write the equivalent in guest blog posts and interviews as I did for writing the books. And, that's good.
Yep.
In that it gets things out. It exposes you to other people, and I understand that. And I'm good with doing that. But to do that on top of publishing twice, 3 times a week on your own blog, that's just too much for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, maybe that's lazy. I don't know. But that's my limit.
No, I think you're right. 'Cause it's a thing that I don't think a lot of us writers really consider that part. It's that the work that you put into marketing your work is equal to or greater than the effort you put into writing your book. So it's like, know what you're signing up for before you start.
The other thing that I will say that's slightly easier, easy, yay, is if you utilize the correct keywords and the correct categories, you can get noticed.
Mm-hmm.
It's things like that. If you're self-published, you have the ability to manipulate that stuff. That's just something to keep in mind.
Now that we've talked about the incredible 2013 you had, and we've talked about, like I'm exhausted from listening to your blog tour proposal coming up. So, you definitely have a lot going on in addition to, I believe you said a new book coming out in July. So what else have you got going on in 2014? Like, think of this as your chance to plug Liz Borino's ongoing saga.
I have the Angel series coming out. The first is Angel's Hero, and the second is Angel's Truth. Angel's Hero comes out on the 26th of this month. Angel's Truth is coming out 3 weeks later on March 12th. And I did this because I'm trying to break the cycle of second book doesn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
The way I ended the first book, I'm hoping people really want to read the second book.
Cliffhanger.
Just a little, yeah. But I'm good for those. So.
Well, yeah. A topic that you and I will have to have offline.
Yes. I will say that when my beta readers read book 1, Angel's Hero, my favorite reaction that I got was, I love you, I hate you, oh my god, that ended. And then, are you done yet? No, I have 2 weeks to finish this. No, now.
That's really funny. I had a beta reader that gave me my favorite piece of feedback so far, which was, you and I are in a fight right now. I'm like, perfect. Then I nailed the emotional impact I was going for there. Well, that's very cool. So you got 2 things coming out here in the next couple of weeks. The end of your series with Michelle coming out in July. Anything slated for the back half, as if that's not enough?
Not yet, but I do have one other book coming out in June, which is Crimson Bonds. That's still in the process of being written. It is a dystopian gay romance. Yeah, we'll leave it at that until I have a cohesive blurb to give you.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully you'll come back closer to June and we can talk about that a bit more. Which also unfortunately means we are about out of time for this episode. This is always a bummer for me. Like these podcasts could go on for hours and I probably still wouldn't scratch the surface of everything. But Liz, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a delight to chat with you. Insightful as always.
Thank you for having me.
So we've got Angel's Hero up next from you very, very soon, and then followed shortly thereafter by Angel's Truth. So be on the lookout for Liz Borino at an online bookstore near you.
Thank you very much.